guys, welcome to today's episode of the Learn Feng Shui podcast. I'm Candace Berlanga, certified Feng Shui practitioner and red ribbon professional with the International Feng Shui Guild. So today's topic, a little more serious, rebuilding your life after fire loss. Where do you start? What happens in those early days after you lose your home to a fire? As you may or may not know, Texas has experienced one of the largest wildfires in the history of the state, burning over 1 million acres and losing about 400 to 500 homes that were total loss. And it's just kind of been devastating to the state, and so today, to talk about how to start rebuilding, is Emily Jameson. So Emily is a trauma-informed master certified life coach, and she specializes in helping women rebuild their lives after losing their homes to a fire. And this is actually a passion that's been born out of her own experience of surviving 2 total loss house fires. So I can't even imagine. A little bit of a backstory and kind of synchronicity on me and Emily here. I actually met her about a year ago, and when I did the feng shui for her home, she's a client of mine, and then days after we met, her home, she had a total loss house fire, and my heart just went out to her. So we stayed in touch, and we did a little feng shui for the home she was renting and her temporary arrangements. And she actually, has just been rebuilding her home, and she messaged me that Thursday, and she told me she had a free downloadable guide and she's doing this coaching. And that Monday, the fires started, and I thought, oh my gosh, this just seems too synchronistic. Let's talk about this. So I had Emily come on the radio program that I do once a month. I thought it'd be great for a regional audience, but also want to share with you guys, because Emily's guide and her wisdom is not just for people experiencing house fires, but people experiencing trauma also. On a little bit of a personal note, I do feel like I was kind of sporadic and maybe all over the place. And so if you are listening to this and you hear my line of questioning or my thoughts and they kind of don't make sense, it's because I was actually very distracted, not because of Emily. Her insight was so helpful, but because I hadn't slept the night before and my family was actually going through their own traumatic experience. My cousin's 18-year-old son had been on life support for 2 weeks, and he passed, and they were taking him off life support and harvesting his organs the exact day I recorded this. And so I just obviously couldn't take my mind. I actually had to leave the recording studio and go straight to the hospital, and I made it just in time to witness that. And so when I say that Emily's guide is not just for a fire trauma, but for other traumas too, highly recommend you go check that out. So if you're a praying person, meditating person, whatever, hold a space for my family and my cousin, again, who lost her young son. He was about to graduate. It's just been a really big blow to the family. Just been super hard. I was able to take the last week off. I didn't plan on it, but it tended to work out just fine. It worked out really well, and spent some time with my extended family, and it was kind of healing to the soul. And so you guys just keep them in your thoughts and prayers. So let's go ahead and get to Emily and welcome her. And today, again, talking about rebuilding your life after fire loss. Emily, thank you so much again. So just kind of starting off, I know, so we talked a little bit about, or not we didn't, but before the show started, the topic was, people wanting to help, and they make all these donations, and there's just this overwhelming hope or help that comes in. But sometimes, we don't need the physical donation. Sometimes there's too much of that stuff. And so how can we start off just supporting our family members, in that emotional way?
Well, one of the things that I think so many people, your heart, I think each one of us, if something like this is happening to someone that we know, we are overcome with emotion, right? You want to connect, you want to reach out, you want to talk to this person, you want to make sure you're okay, you're processing, what would I do if this happened to me? Oh my gosh. And it can be a lot. And one of the things that I would like to help equip more people to do as supportive, friends and family members is understand this little kind of concept, which is to comfort in, dump out. So
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? Like imagine that you throw a pebble into a pool of water. You're going to see those concentric rings coming out from that, right? So if we're kind of holding that concept of concentric rings or like a target with like a bullseye in the middle, you
Mm-hmm.
have the person who's most affected by the crisis in the middle of those circles. That is the person who needs the comfort. And the next ring out would be like their spouse, their intimate partner, or like really, really close family friends, people who are like the closest circle to that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next ring out from that would be like, other friends, other family members. And then you can imagine like one circle out from that would be like church family, other people, colleagues, work colleagues, like other people who are connected. So the idea of this is that comfort needs to go in to the person who's affected, and then any stress or worries or whatever that someone is having needs to be dumped to one circle out.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I
So
think
the idea is that you like the gift that you're giving isn't going to that person and kind of like dumping all of your emotional
mm-hmm.
worries and concerns onto the people who are the most affected. And I think if we all learn how to carry, like maybe responsibly be aware of how we're supporting people emotionally, it helps the person in the middle to do their healing work or to attend to what they need to attend to, which is, especially in the aftermath of a fire, is immense, without having to carry and support emotionally the people around them.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it is easy to kind of make it about you and your feelings about the situation, because we all have these strong feelings. I mean, even just kind of
Yeah.
watching from afar. And
Mhm.
I I'm dealing with some family stuff right now too, and it's not about me. It's I'm not even super close to the situation, but I still have these big
Mhm.
feelings, right? And so,
Right.
yeah, but you're right. That doesn't need to be shared with the person closest to
Totally. So call your
that
best
situation.
friend, right?
Mhm.
And like dump all of that onto your best friend because I'm sure that they're happy to hold that for you. It's a way that they can support you so that you can then better support your family.
Mhm. Yes, yes. And so when I know one of the things you cover too is kind of looking, so we're talking about the emotional support. And so I know we tend to want to give items to gift items, and to replace all those things right away. But I know according to you have a downloadable PDF where it talks about kind of
Mhm.
restoring your life after losing it, or even experiencing some kind of tragedy. But in this case, it's, you're losing your possessions and it's not
Yeah.
just an emotional loss or the loss of a loved one, even, but the loss of everything you had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, one of the things you kind of touch on too is looking at not feeling the need to replace everything right away.
Yeah. That's been really interesting. One of the things that I noticed from my own experience is it's actually kind of connected to your nervous system, and it's extremely jarring to your nervous system to suddenly be like without any of the things that you had. So, like, we all kind of have like a set point of like where we're comfortable with. And then when that just the bottom of that drops out, you feel almost like you're free falling. Like you aren't connected to yourself and your space, to the creature comforts that you had. And sometimes we have this compulsion to just like go out and like buy a whole bunch of stuff all of a sudden. And I encourage people to kind of like pause. Like, obviously there's a level you need underwear, you need some clothes to wear, but you may not really want to just go back and buy everything exactly what you had before. There's, this is a space where in my coaching and the way I work with people, I want to invite them to move into this area where, in between what you had before and what you're going to create for yourself in the future, and really start to connect with what it is that you want to create for yourself. Because, being someone who's lost everything in a fire, and too, Candace, as someone who is very intimately familiar with the elements in Chinese astrology and what that means in feng shui, you know, fire is one of the quickest activators of change. And it's devastating and it's traumatic, but it also kind of it clears the slate. And so in that space, this is, I think, is the turning point that I invite my clients into, is to consider what they really want to create for themselves going forward. Are they that person who needs 10 business suits, or was that their old life, or who are they now and who do they want to be going forward? And then begin to get in touch with that. And that's not something that happens in the days and weeks right after going through the devastation of the fire and processing all of that loss. But in those months after that, as the dust settles a little bit, that's the space that I want to bring people into curiosity. Who do I get to be now? What is it that I get to create with my life and in this rebuilding process? And I think if we can tune into and tap into that, there can be a little bit of a thrill, a little excitement, and that is a glimmer that I want to invite people to move into that space.
And kind of before they move into that space, obviously there's a lot of emotions and some things going on like that. And you talked about kind of restoring the nervous system during that time and kind of working through that first. How does one start even processing, I think, this this trauma? How do you even start coming to terms with it, Where do you start at?
Well, that is such a good question. And I think that that ends up looking lots of different ways for people. First of all, the things that happen inside of our bodies as a response to a crisis like that, there's a huge spike in adrenaline, and many people can't sleep because you're totally in that fight or flight kind of crisis response mode. So our bodies are flooded with, adrenaline and then also cortisol, and those help us to respond to the crisis at hand and get everything done. And you're also kind of in a state of shock, really, which is a protective mechanism to keep you from fully processing emotionally what you're going through. That's kind of saved until later. So after, maybe 72 hours or so is when the rush of those hormones in your body start to subside. And then a lot of times people experience fatigue and just that kind of drop in. Oh, and that's, I think, is more of the space of oh my gosh, this is real. What do I do now? So, for restoring the nervous system, that can happen in lots and lots of different ways. And sometimes it's just giving yourself understanding, first of all, that what's happening is totally normal, that your body can't keep going at that level of that eyes wide open, big heightened awareness, extra energy and responding kind of in that crisis response sort of mode. Some people are going to react that way. Other people might go into a state of collapse earlier. That's kind of just another parasympathetic nervous system response. And then in the weeks after, just attending to yourself and letting yourself be slow if you need to be slow, taking deep, calming breaths if you can. That's a really important way of resetting the nervous system. One thing, too, is whatever kind of your go-to is sometimes it's exercise for people, right? Getting out, moving the body so that stuff can get moved through the body, and then you can kind of get yourself back to this point of homeostasis. I have a technique that I always start with my clients where that's the first thing that I know we have to do is getting them brought back into what we call that window of tolerance, where is the space that your nervous system is used to functioning at. Mm-hmm. And when you're blown out of it, it's, you aren't your best self. So you're responding to the immediate needs of your family, your shelter, your, what are you going to wear? How are you going to have food? Like all of those things are pressing and immediate. And at the same time, most of us have families and we have kids, and we need to also be attuning with them. And that's the space that right away, like if you can anchor yourself by understanding that you need to do what you can do to get your nervous system brought back, into that window of tolerance, then from there, you can also be checking in and connecting with your kids and making sure that they know that they're safe and doing the things that, I talk about those rituals too. The rituals of connection that help us, they actually really are part of what brings us back into our window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And so in my case, I have an 8-year-old son, and he was there when our home burned down. So, the whole arc of things are on fire. Oh, now it's blazing. We're running away and trying to get to safety. He was there for all of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the best pieces of advice that someone gave me, which, I'm grateful for, even though I'm a trauma conscious informed coach, you kind of like forget sometimes, and it's helpful when you can hear something from someone, you're like, oh yeah, that's what I need to be doing. Yeah. So I was advised to just keep the rituals with my son the same. We went and stayed at my mother-in-law's house, and, so he wasn't in his same bedroom. He didn't have any of his same stuff, mm-hmm. but our nighttime routine was bedtime, so have your bath. We go through, all of the brushing the teeth and getting ready, have your bath, have your story, mom snuggles with you, go to sleep. And I worked to really keep that the same so that was an anchoring, connected, predictable time. Mm-hmm. And I brought that into my coaching program because I also saw for myself, like, what were my rituals? What were the things that helped me to connect with old Emily in this weird space of suddenly being, wearing someone else's clothes mm-hmm. and living in someone else's home. But I realized that for me, I had a ritual of always having a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. So we can change a routine into a meaningful ritual by really just bringing mindfulness to it. Mm-hmm. And so, I advise people to find a point of connection with yourself that kind of can be the bridge between the life that you had prior to the traumatic event and help you with, like, I'm still me, I still love to get up in the morning and make a cup of coffee and stand there and savor it and think about my day. So when we can find those things to, like, almost like cling to, kind of like your rock in the storm, those help anchor us in a time when everything else is, like, turbulent and unpredictable, and it's something to look forward to, but something to find connection with yourself, with your kids. And then if you have a partner, think about the way you can make it a point of connecting meaningfully every day with them as well. And I think those are very, very critical things to do in the immediacy of this type of loss.
Right, things you can, within the parameter of your control, I suppose.
Yeah,
because you can't.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
that is exactly it, mm-hmm. Candace. It is having that little tiny bit of control of your life. And, like, I'm making this choice for me now, right? No matter where you're at, if you're at the Red Cross shelter, you probably can find a cup of coffee. And if you just bring your senses into it, like, this is me enjoying this. Or if you don't like coffee, tea or whatever cold glass of water, whatever your thing is. If you're a runner, going on a run. If you're a person who likes to walk and you're walking and that's your thing that you get to do every day for you because it's a choice that you're making to really just establish your own still your sense of control and efficacy in your life, even if everything else is not something you have control over. That helps people a ton.
Yeah, for sure. It's probably hard to keep those rituals too because you're, calling, making your calls, running around, and so you're right, just being mindful, I think, and taking a few minutes maybe during the day to
Yeah,
say I'm
they
going
don't
to
have
do
to be
these
long, and that's
things.
why I think um, with with our kids, that's stuff that we do in the evenings, regardless,
Mm-hmm.
and with ourselves. I can just speak for myself, but I've been a coffee drinker for,
Yeah.
25 years. So I'm going to get up and have that cup of coffee before I start doing all of the other things I had to do. And fire loss is just like having an unwanted additional part-time or full-time job. Like, there's a
I
lot
can
to be
imagine.
done.
Yeah.
But you still are going to get up in the morning, and even 2 or 3 minutes of just like, this is me. Like, I'm here having this moment with myself and understanding that it's not going to be like this forever. I think it helps give us that groundedness. And from that place of being a little more grounded and a little more connected, then we can just handle the things that have to happen, which are all hugely stressful.
Yeah, and this also pertains. We were kind of talking yesterday. We were given, the rundown for the show, and this is, can be applied to different trauma events in your life. It
Oh,
doesn't just have to be for
absolutely.
fire events, and
Yes.
so yeah, I think it just kind of, moving that over to, what that looks like for you if you're experiencing
Oh,
some,
totally.
even being between homes or, facing divorce and you're having to move or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. How,
Mhm.
speaking of your kids too, like, how do you help? You lost your home in a fire as a teenager,
Mhm.
also.
I
And so
did.
last year,
Yeah.
and then when you were a teenager. And so, how do, kids, I think, might be harder to come to terms with the things they love or their childhood memories.
Mhm.
I think, where do you start with that? It's a big
So
question.
the way that things went when I was in high school, it was the 90s. And what I've realized since then is that the 90s were not a trauma-informed time. I think
Mm-mm.
every single one
Yeah.
of us can
Get
agree
over
with
it.
that.
Yeah, that's what, just get over it. Yeah, you're
So
fine. Mm-hmm.
so we're just expected to, like, suck it up and move on. And that was my parents just did not have the skills to help shepherd us. They had 4 kids. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And I think they were really overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do except they're baby boomers, right? So they were just like, okay, well, let's all get back to work and, like,
Mm-hmm.
just keep moving forward. In our case, one of my siblings had accidentally started the fire. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's absolute emotional trauma there for him. And my parents just told us kids to not talk about it. I remember the day when they said, don't talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
which is the wrong advice.
Mm-hmm.
So the impact of that time on me really actually comes back to that moment of them saying, don't talk about this, and then me just holding all of that in my body,
Mm-hmm.
having tons of feelings about the whole situation, and nowhere to take that. No, like, I didn't have any resources, or I couldn't, like, take myself to counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've spent many, many years, like, working through that as an adult. And in this case, what is also kind of interesting about my story, at least it's interesting to me, is that I became a trauma certified coach years before I went through this second fire. So when I went through this second event, I had this, like, robust toolbox to turn
Mm-hmm.
to, right? It's still stressful and still really, really hard, but I had a lot more training. I had a lot more knowledge. I could understand what was happening to me and my partner. And the first important thing was to not make talking about it feel like a taboo. Like I would follow my son's lead, and we would talk about it. And one of the things that was really critical at first, so we have 3 dogs. We have 7 acres in Washington, and we have animals. And one of our cat was an outside cat, and she sometimes slept in the garage. So we really did not know if she had made it or not. And we left as quickly as we could. We took our dogs, but we didn't know where the cat was. And my son was worried that she had died. And so we went back. It was probably a few days later after I realized that he was really concerned about the cat. So we went back, and what we were planning to do was to kind of just honor the importance of the cat, and in a small way, like have a I guess funeral, so to speak. But she emerged. So somehow, it's like literally true. Cats have 9 lives, and she was running around. So at that point, we knew we had to get food, and we ended up going back to the property every day and feeding her, because that was really her domain, was on the property. But addressing that and was a big thing. And then what we also did was, with my son, be there at the devastation at the site, and talk about what we missed, what we loved and what we missed, and kind of just try to intentionally come into that space of acknowledging the loss. I think grief is something that I personally don't think we are well equipped to navigate in our culture, even though everybody's going to face it at some point. But on the other hand, you don't really, you just have to go through it to learn how to navigate it. No one can really prepare you by telling you about grief until you are walking through it, right? So the best things are to be open and talk honestly with kids, because kids are extremely perceptive and they're paying really close attention. So my son, every once in a while, expressed that he felt like he was unhappy with himself because he thought he should have done more in the moment to help with the fire. He was 7 years old when this happened. And, from that child's perspective, he felt like he didn't do anything to help. And he was, how kids, their locus of the world is them. And as an adult, of course, there's nothing he could have done that would have made a difference. And so I really tuned into that and tried to tell him how proud I was of what he did do, which is do exactly what I told him to do, and stay sitting in one spot, while my husband went and tried to put out the fire and deal with it. And so over time, as I've had opportunities to just kind of reinforce, you did such a good job of following directions when it really mattered, and I'm really proud of you, how that went. I'm trying to kind of pepper that in so that he'll receive that and maybe internally change his own memory of how that event went and his role in it, that it's the adult's job to keep the kids safe. And you did a great job by being a really good listener when it really mattered.
Oh yeah, that's I think super important. So to let your kids kind of lean into those emotions and kind of address them as they come up, instead of, obviously we don't want to stomp those emotions out. We don't want our kids to
no, we don't. We don't. And this is where it, coming back to that whole the idea of bringing yourself back into your window of tolerance. When we, and I'm speaking as the adults in a situation, are too stressed we often become like impatient or snappy,
Mm-hmm.
and or like, maybe inadvertently like shut down the
Mm-hmm.
the kids, or aren't really attuned to, what is the need behind this behavior that
Mm-hmm.
I'm witnessing on top, right? So that's especially why I really want to guide people back to like that, you know, I guess self-care is kind of the word, but
Mm-hmm.
more of this like self-awareness of, what do I need to do to take care of me right now? Are there, you know, there's like, herbal supplements for stress that I could be getting for
Mm-hmm.
myself that'll help me just in the moment, come back as much as I can to regulate myself so that then I can be responsive. What's interesting about trauma is that trauma is not so much the actual event itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's what happens as a result of the event. So there's this great quote that I love that says, trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
So how our caregivers are connected with us, how our community rallies or comes in to support us, those are the ways that trauma is actually mitigated for somebody. It's about like being believed. It's about being seen, kind of like witnessed. And when we're having, an event like a house fire, like a death, like a loss of some kind, having support and being, being, I guess supported is a word I feel like I'm using way too much, but like having people understand and give space for the processing of emotions, which can be wild, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like wildly variable, but
Yeah.
understanding that this is happening and this person needs, space or a meal prepared for them or whatever we can do. But with a lot of curiosity, a lot of compassion, that is how something then does not become an event that is very deeply imprinted with trauma that you spend the rest of your life trying to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Got you. So I think just dealing with it as it comes probably is just the best, because I know there's a whole range of emotions that go through trauma. Again, like I said, I've actually had some family stuff going on this week, and I've seen anger, I've seen blame, I've
Yeah,
seen let's
yeah.
try to control certain things that are just they're out of the realm of control again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just
So
again
so
dealing
for
with it.
you,
Yeah.
exact like it's just understanding that grief is at the heart of this loss,
Mm-hmm.
right? That that there's the event that happened with your family, with all the fires that are moving through West Texas. There's these events happening, and then there's the depth of the loss and the grief that goes with that. And grief is a very broad spectrum, like how
Mm-hmm.
people handle grief. It's wide and it's varied, and it's something that I think we would all benefit from looking at with a lot of compassion and a lot of curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who are processing that loss and dealing with their own grief and then trying to support other people through it, that just makes it doubly important to resource yourself, whether it's getting into counseling or, finding someone one circle outside of where you're at to
Mm-hmm.
be the person you can go to with your big feelings, right? That like dump out
Yeah, for sure.
thing so that you can turn back in to your family or the people who are in the center with you and be able to give them more comfort and stability. And it sucks. It's really hard. It's hard to be affected by these crises and also trying to attend to and minister and support and love the other people who
Mm-hmm.
need it.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. For sure.
I'm also here today. I actually sit in with Candace. My name is
Oh,
Bree.
hi.
Hi.
Hi, Bree.
And I actually had a house fire. I guess it was probably, let's see, my son was 4 months old and he's going to be 13
Oh,
this year.
wow.
Oh my goodness.
But luckily it was only my kitchen. But you know what, when the whole time you've been talking, all I thought about was how daunting the insurance process is, right? You're already
Mhm.
dealing with
Yeah.
such a loss. And it was a rented house at the time, and the
Mhm.
insurance came in and they're like, "Oh, we cover this, but not that. We cover that and not that."
Mhm.
And I was just like so confused. I had no kitchen. Everything was black. I'm trying to think, how do I rebuild with a 4 month old, you know? And
Yeah.
so, because the insurance is like, oh, we'll rebuild the kitchen, but anything else that has fire set on it, we're not touching. We
Oh
don't pay for the
no.
cleaning part of that.
Oh my
And also, we're not
gosh.
going to pay to have it replaced. And I was like, it was literally just the structure. So I think, when you're thinking about insurance, even as a renter, so many people think,
Yeah.
I don't need renter's insurance.
Oh
If
my
we own a
goodness.
home, obviously most of us have homeowners insurance. But I think it's super important to read through your policy because that was probably the hardest lesson. And, you're
Mhm.
already dealing with a loss and then you're fighting the insurance. And it was just
Yeah.
an awful time. And I was 22 years old at the time, right? I was
Yeah.
super young,
Mhm.
didn't know life hardly. And I just think, I'm very grateful that at the time it was only the kitchen. But, when you're dealing with the trauma and then the insurance trauma is a completely
Oh,
separate thing in
for
itself.
real. Yes.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
Can you talk a
that
little
is
bit about that side of it? I mean, I don't know if you work, like, how is it getting up and going to work still every day?
well, for me, my work is my own business. I'm
Mm,
a solopreneur, as they say. And so, in some ways there was a silver lining to that for me, because I had a few clients, but I was I was just completely consumed by the things that needed to happen for my family, for my son, and so I didn't take on more work. When my parents' house burned down when I was 17, both of my parents had full-time jobs. And so that could also definitely be part of the reason why they just had no bandwidth for helping, like really paying attention to the things that the kids needed. And they were just trying to get through a day. And I think, like, on the insurance side of things, you know, insurance companies range. So we were fortunate. I would say that for us, it was a silver lining that we did end up with a good insurance company. But you don't know. Like, you don't know when you're choosing an insurance company who's going to be the most responsive and attentive, and when I'm in a crisis and I really need them, right? So I think what you're saying here is a great word of warning, and there are some things, to just put out there for people who aren't in this situation right now, which is absolutely check your coverage. In our situation with the insurance company, we were underinsured for the rebuilding of our home. We had this policy, 5 years ago or whenever, and since then, COVID happened, which completely changed the cost of building materials,
Oh yeah.
all the, supply chain stuff. I don't know if people would even say it's actually back to what it was, but just the basic cost of wood is completely different than it was 5 years ago. And so the cost to rebuild our home was more than the coverage that we had. And while our insurance company was, like, really good, they were working with us to the maximum extent that they were able. What I would say to people is that if you're listening and your house has not burned down, or you don't have renter's insurance, go get renter's insurance. Whatever it's going to cost you is going to be worth it when something happens and you need to have that coverage. And if you own a home, you should go and review your policy and actually check and make sure that you have coverage that's going to help you build a home with, a replacement at replacement cost if something were to happen. And I think reviewing that every once in a while is a really, really, really good idea.
Yeah, I agree. There was nothing worse, as I was sitting there trying to wash all my dishes that had been burned, and then I got to the point where I was like, I'm just throwing these away, because
Mhm.
and I had just been married at the time, and a lot of it was like my
Mhm.
fancy china that was
Oh,
gifted
that's
to
so
me.
sad.
And I was just like, I can't do this because you're just
Yeah.
so emotionally broken. I was
Yeah.
looking at the whole
Yeah.
burnt kitchen and I'm like, I'm just
Mhm.
going to throw it away and restart. And do you think, luckily, my son doesn't remember that, but when we're talking about restarting, is it
Mhm.
healthier to say, okay, I'm good with restarting now, let me pick myself up? Is it healthier? I know the grieving process is a different time for every single person, but
Yeah. Yeah.
when you're talking about restarting, what is the healthy way, the healthy first step to do that?
Oh my
That's a
goodness.
good question.
I think that is a good question, and it also varies so much from person to person, right?
Mhm.
And I had the most fascinating experience as I have been developing this program. I have a 12-week coaching program for people who are rebuilding their lives after losing their home to fire. And as I was doing this, I was conducting interviews with other people who had gone through the loss of their home in a fire. And I had never had the chance to actually to speak with people in this way that I did before. And when I got to talk to people about what they'd experienced, you know, the impact, it ranged because some people were still very affected, even 20 years later, had a lot of really complicated emotions and grief still coming up about what they'd gone through. Other people were like, yep, that was then, and I got through it, and I don't think about it now. I'm not affected. So it's, honestly, if I could even do more research on the whys of how some people, kind of just bounce back and move forward and, don't experience trauma from something like this happening and why other people do, I find that very fascinating. But it is kind of like a person by person sort of thing. So in our situation, I think my partner is very, very sentimental. And the things that he had, were he his father had passed away about 8 years ago, and he's a hunter, and he had like pictures of things that times he had been hunting with his dad. Those were really special to him. He had mounts that he had done from when he was a teenager, and the loss of that stuff, for I think I would say for myself as well, like the things that we lost that were really like tangible, kind of memorable things that connected us to family members that we loved, or you know experiences that we'd had, those things that really hit the hardest. um, in my case, I'm throughout the course of my life, and it also could be colored by going through this experience when I was younger. I have it's been a little bit easier for me, I think, to kind of just be like, okay, all right, this is where we're at now. I'm going to dust myself off. We're going to move forward. We're going to kind of reconceptualize how we want our life to be. But for him, because of the connection to all these, really cherished memories, the loss of that stuff really hit hard. And it's been like it's just going through layers and layers of grief. So I guess to answer your question the long way around, Bree, I think that it comes back to each person, kind of navigating that on their own, and understanding that the grieving process is not linear. You're not going to be like, oh, good, it's been a month since this happened to me and I'm good now. No. You're going to grieve, I think, seasonally as you kind of move into a new season. Or like I remember when we moved into our rental house, we were living with my mother-in-law for about 4 months while we, took a while to find a rental house to move into, and then it took 2 more months from finding it for it to be available for us to move in. So 4 months after our house burned down, we moved into this rental house. It was a furnished rental, but I'm in the kitchen trying to make dinner for my family. And while it had a lot of kitchen items, it didn't have everything. So it did not have a vegetable peeler. And I had looked everywhere, there's all kinds of random gadgets, no vegetable peeler. And I started crying because in my old kitchen, I had 4 vegetable peelers, and now I'm, just confronting with like, okay, so just to make dinner for my family tonight, I have to go to the store, I have to buy a vegetable peeler, I have to come home. Like it just felt like everything sometimes was like, to get one thing done, you have to do 3 things to get back to the point where, in your old life, you would have just opened this drawer, pulled out this vegetable peeler, peeled the carrots, moved on with your life. And I think those things, it's kind of weird, like what it is for everybody that will bring up the emotion. But my advice for that is to engage it. And that is some of the best advice that I was given. And in my late 20s, I had a roommate who suddenly passed away. And I had like no skills for really navigating grief at that time. But when my therapist told me, like, grief is going to feel like a tidal wave coming at you. And many times our inclination is to just run away from it, right? Like push it away, not have to go there, except that it's still going to come. If you push it down, it's like the force of it coming back up is going to be even more. Like there will be times, and if you don't engage it, the times that it comes back up are going to be like the most inconvenient times. So your job is to just like be there and meet it. And like the words that she used are kind of a little weird, but she said, just like nibble at the edge of it, like take what you can take and let that, and just do that. And then it will subside. And when it comes back up the next time, you just meet it. You just do what you can do, and it will subside. And that's your work of like meeting the grief, being in it for the moment that it comes for you, and then letting it go so that you're able to eventually experience it less and less and move forward. But if you don't do that work, it's still lingering in the background, asking to be seen.
I think it really is those times, we put on our brave face and we put on I'm strong, I can do this and that. And then it's like the smallest inconvenience is the time, but I'll lose it, right? That's the time
Yes.
where I just break down, and
Right.
that will get me. So I 100% understand that. Understand
And
that.
the hard part is like letting it, just letting the tears flow, letting the feelings be felt. And I think that generationally, it's also really interesting with how my son, like how he feels about crying. He's like, I just have to let it out, and like, it's also interesting to be alive now. And there's a ton of science about what tears actually do. They really are cleansing. They really do release, the stress. Like it's just a natural release. And when it's done, it's done. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's just a physiological response that if we can, uncouple from it meaning anything good or bad, but just be like, oh, this is my body, like opening up the pressure valve and letting it out.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let some pressure out.
So we just have a couple more minutes. I know you said you are a trauma coach. Do you have like a website or a phone number that anyone can reach you at?
Absolutely, I do. I would love to invite people to check out the guide that I created. That's at discovery.emilyjamesoncoaching.com. I spell my last name just like the whiskey, Emily, Jameson, coaching.com. My website is emilyjamesoncoaching.com, and my phone number is 509-571-7784. I'm on Instagram at the Emily Jameson, and I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook as well under Emily Jameson Coaching.
Perfect.
And
Well,
I just started a podcast, but it won't be live until next week. But my podcast is called From Ashes to Empowerment.
I'll be excited to give that a
yeah,
listen.
I just think you were a wealth of information. I know I didn't talk too much. I was taking in it all.
It's very interesting.
And I just think, yeah, if anyone can go to your website or reach out to you, I think you'll be
Yeah.
an amazing help to them.
Thank you so much for having me. I really hope that there were some things that are able to help people in your community as they all, navigate and respond to these crises you guys are facing right now.
All right, guys. Well, I hope you found that information as interesting and insightful as I did. I think it can be very helpful. So hopefully, if you or a loved one is going through something right now, you'll be able to use some of the tools that Emily talked about. And of course, if you need to get a hold of her, all her information will be linked in the show notes for you to download that free guide. And if you want to contact her to talk, I'll catch you guys not next week. It's Easter weekend. I think this whole situation has really kind of helped me put in perspective, just really prioritizing my family. And so I'll just be taking some time off and enjoying my long weekend. And I'll catch you guys April 5th for the energy update for April. I can't believe that's already coming up. So, yeah. Anyway, you guys check all the links down below, and I'll catch you guys April 5th.